Hello and welcome to episode 91 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week, Honda announces they don't want to tire themselves out by making EVs. Stellantis admits they don't know how to make money selling EVs. China's offshore wind power over 300 gigawatts. And this podcast is not sponsored by Exxon Mobil. All that and more in this edition of the Clean Energy Show. Brian, I understand your back is out, and you're not on drugs. I'm disappointed. I was hoping you'd either drink or do muscle relaxants today.
No, well, I mean, if you could supply me some drugs, that would be great. But yeah, I threw out my back on the weekend. It's slightly improved today, and I managed to prop myself up in this chair. But if I happen to fall over during the podcast, maybe you could call 911 for me.
Okay. You know, the chairs are notorious in your podcast studio for being hard, so I don't know, maybe that's the problem.
It's a terrible chair, but no, this happened in another location, but I just need to rest for a couple of days, and then it usually goes back to normal.
Just tell us it was sex-related, and then we'll respect you.
Yes, it was sex-related.
Okay, good. So, have you seen Get Back yet for the Beatles?
Yes, and I want to talk about that, but first, the update on last week's Chit Chat. Remember I told you about going to Saskatchewan to see that movie?
Yeah.
I forgot part of the story, which was before the movie started, they play advertisements, of course. And there was an advertisement for Thrive Wealth Management, and our dear friend Laura Abramsen was in the commercial. And yeah, I just forgot to mention that last
For
week.
Thrive Wealth Management.
Yeah, it's a local wealth management thing. And she's just, in the commercial, she's just given birth to a baby and she's in a hospital.
Oh, I think I've seen that. And I thought, is that Laura? No.
Yeah.
That can't be Laura.
It's Laura. She does a fantastic job.
She finally made it to the big screen.
Yeah, but I want to talk about Get Back, the Beatles documentary, because you mentioned it last week. Did I ever tell you the story of the time that I spoke to Peter Jackson?
No.
Okay.
How's this has been an oversight?
Well, the year was 1982. Cast yourself back to the early 90s. And I used to go regularly to the Toronto International Film Festival. And this is before Peter Jackson was famous, but I've been following his career since his first feature film. And of course, he's known mostly for directing the Lord of the Rings trilogy and now the Beatles documentary. But I saw his very first film on like a bootleg VHS. It was called Bad Taste. And my friend Bruce had a copy of it. So I was following his career right from the very beginning. And so in 1992, he had a feature film out called Brain Dead, which was later retitled as Dead Alive. So it's one of his early features. It's a big splatter movie. It's like a zombie kind of movie. It's sort of a horror comedy, splatter comedy. And so in 1992, it played at the Toronto Film Festival at Midnight Madness, which is, they have these midnight screenings of usually like horror films, splatter films, right. The sort of the weird stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I went to this midnight screening at the Bloor Cinema for Brain Dead. It was one of the best screenings I've ever been to in my life. That got a standing ovation at the end because it was like the perfect Midnight Madness film. Like, it's just this crazy zombie movie. It's got the most blood you've probably ever seen in a movie. It's a lot of fun. I really like it. And it made me a Peter Jackson fan, very much from that day. But anyway, so.
What year was it again?
1992.
Really?
Yeah. So it was his second or third feature film.
So how old was he then?
Well, he's around our age, so he was maybe born around 1960. But he started out, his first movie, Bad Taste, he had made it on weekends with his friends, like when he was in his early 20s. And that one's kind of fun, too. It's not great, but it sort of showed early promise. It's this weird movie about aliens that come and disguise themselves as New Zealand farmers. It's a lot of fun. But anyway, so I go to this screening of Brain Dead in 1992. It brings the house down. It's just a killer screening. It's so fantastic. And Peter Jackson is there to introduce it, and he does a Q&A after the film. And the two things I remember from the Q&A, he explained that the blood was made with Canadian maple syrup, which he was very excited to tell the audience in Canada. They had enough money that they could import hundreds, perhaps thousands of gallons of Canadian maple syrup.
Why?
To use as the base for the blood. I thought they used corn
syrup for that, which would be a lot cheaper.
They thought it was just the best. They tested many things, and the Canadian maple syrup had the best consistency. And of course, you add red dye and other stuff.
Yeah.
So they had enough money to import all this maple syrup, but they didn't have enough money to shoot it on 35 millimeter, which you would normally shoot a movie on.
Yeah.
So they shot it on 16 millimeter. He explains this in the Q&A, and then they blew it up to 35 millimeter. And I was quite surprised because it looked really good. Like normally you take quite a hit in quality if you shoot it on 16 and blow it up to 35. So the Q&A finishes, and I decide to go down and see if I can talk to him about it. And he was still there kind of at the front of the auditorium. And he was sort of surrounded by other film nerds. Like I wasn't the only one that wanted to talk to him. So I managed to get in this circle of film nerds talking to Peter Jackson. So I wanted to ask him, was it regular 16 millimeter or Super 16? There's sort of two different flavors of it. Super 16 is a little bit better, a little bit bigger, a little bit higher quality.
Yeah.
But he said, no, it was regular 16 millimeter, which I was quite surprised because the quality was quite good. And I said, oh, well, that's weird. Like, why does it look so good? And he said, well, there are these new 35 millimeter interpositive stocks, and that's what they used in the optical printer to blow it up. And that's why it looks so good. Like these intermediate stocks had gotten better. And I said, wow, that's amazing. That's a great story. So here we are. It's 2021. Peter Jackson has now directed Get Back, this 8-9 hour Beatles documentary. And the original source for all this stuff
16 millimeter.
60 hours of 16 millimeter film that they shot in 1969. So yeah, the problem with 16 millimeter, it can be quite grainy. It's not, as professional. And in fact, Paul McCartney, somewhere in the film itself, says, oh, we should have shot this on 35 millimeter because they had planned to do it as a television film. But halfway through, they changed their minds and decided it was going to be a feature documentary that was released in theaters. So yeah, that's funny because there is a discussion about it in the movie where Paul McCartney says, oh, we should have shot this on 35 millimeter. So
you do a Paul McCartney impression. I didn't know that.
No, I don't.
You're sure he's not on back pills?
The point I'm getting around to, and I'm kind of alarmed how much we talk about film grain on this podcast.
Maybe it should be a spinoff.
We should do a whole podcast about film grain. Anyway, so the thing you do now in 2021 with 16 millimeter footage, if you want to clean it up, is you scan it into the computer, and there's various software that can do noise reduction and can, get rid of like dust and scratches and stuff. And I did this very thing myself. I have a film from 1990 called The Final Gift. And a couple of years ago, I did a digital restoration of it. I scanned a film print. I had lost the negatives. I didn't have the negatives anymore, but I had a film print. I scanned it. I put it in the computer. And then I proceeded to get rid of all the little specks of dust and scratches and stuff. So I have some experience with this kind of software. But the problem is, like, the print I had was quite dusty. And if you've only got a few specks of dust, you can do it by hand, like with Photoshop, right? You just go a frame at a time and you get rid of the specks of dust. But I had too much dust. So I had to use this software and kind of crank the settings up fairly high to make sure it got rid of all the dust specks. But when you do that, it starts getting rid of pieces of the picture that are supposed to be there. Like a little tree branch will suddenly disappear in one frame because the software thinks it's, dust or something. So this is the kind of software that they used on Get Back. And I don't know, I thought I enjoyed the film. The audio restoration they did was quite amazing. They used machine learning apparently to clean up the audio and be able to sort of, because you commented last week how good the audio sounds. It's
they strummed over because they didn't want the mics to pick them up talking, so they would strum their instruments over it. So Peter Jackson took those instruments out, or at least reduced them so you could hear them. Yeah,
they used machine learning because the guitar and the voice were on the same track, and you can't normally separate those if they're on the same track, but with this new machine learning software. So, but anyway, on the picture side, they're using this grain reduction software, and I just think they did it wrong. Like, it's just too severe, and you mentioned that a bit last week, too. I tried watching it on my 120-inch projection screen.
That's not the way to do it. No.
And all I could see were all these weird little things going on in the frame. Like somebody walks past something in the background and then the outline of their head starts to get fuzzy because the software gets confused about what's the background and what's the person. And about 90 minutes into part 2, there's a shot of John Lennon's guitar. And the strings of the guitar are completely missing. Like they're gone. Like they've been erased by the software.
They were originally going to release this as a feature film that was 2.5 hours or something. My thought now that you say this is that it wouldn't have worked as a feature film.
Not if they did it this way, but I think they could have dialed back the software and Because you could do it, like they tried to get rid of all the grain, which I think is a fool's errand. Like that 16 millimeter would have been quite grainy.
Right.
So as soon as you start trying to get rid of all the grain, it just looks weird and plastic. Their hair sometimes looked like an anime drawing, like you could see the outlines of certain clumps of hair. Just, it looked weird. So as far as I'm concerned, they screwed up the picture. And yeah, I posted on Twitter a picture of that guitar if you're interested in looking at it. About 90 minutes into part 2. I grabbed a still frame of John Lennon's guitar, and he's picking at the middle strings. So the strings aren't even moving, like the top and bottom strings are not even moving, but they're invisible. They've been erased by the software. So, it was a fascinating thing to watch, but I have some complaints about the picture, and I think they should redo it.
This has been another edition of Brian's Movie Corner. Brian's Movie Corner. If you're wanting to get into the clean energy stuff, it's going to be a while. I've got a lot of grievances this week.
Yeah, so you did your presentation again at the library about electric vehicles.
And they said there wasn't a lot of people there, but they said it was the biggest turnout they've had since COVID. So
is that right?
That made me feel good. I wanted people to come down who had electric vehicles to help answer questions. There's usually a lot of general EV questions. And, because of the spotlight in my face, I couldn't see the crowd very well. But two people put up their hands side by side. And I got them mistaken for somebody else who drove a Volt. So I kind of badmouthed Tesla because, you're in front of people, you're talking. And I said, the rich guys who drive Teslas and, things like that all night. And, boy, I wish I could afford a Tesla. And it turns out the guy was a new Tesla owner, and he did come down. But he's very curmudgeon. I couldn't get him to hold a microphone. He would not hold a microphone. He said, no, I don't need that. I said, but you can drop it at the end. And no, it wouldn't do it. And apparently my daughter sat in front of them, and his wife wanted a Rivian when I was talking about the Rivian. He said, no, I can't have one. No. He said, no, I want one. They were arguing about it. So they liked the Rivian because I said I waded through 1.5 meters of water. Anyway, I found actually less pushback than usual this time. That people usually go through the presentation and people don't get it. They come back and they still have the same misconceptions they did at the beginning of the presentation, but this was not the case. The one thing that people did ask was like, and didn't quite understand, and maybe if I do it again, I can make it more clear, is somebody said, I want to buy a Tesla. I want to buy it soon, but I go to, I don't know, was Edmonton or somewhere by Edmonton, like we were just talking about that new supercharger. And he said, but how would I get there? The point is, I don't think people realize that these networks are popping up even in Canada right now, and you can do it. And I told them, and I share this with our listeners because you guys can do the same thing. If you are thinking of, what would it be like to have an EV to go to place X, because this is where I like to go, go on to a Better Route Planner website. And you can plug in the exact model of vehicle, exact battery size, I think sometimes even the wheel size, and then say, okay, I'm going to go there. And then you can tweak it to say, well, it's going to be cold weather. You can tweak it to say, I'm going to leave at 80%. I'm going to leave at 100% charge. And somebody said you could even put in headwinds. I don't know. Is that true? It may not be true with the basic unpaid app. Yeah,
I can't recall, but you can change the consumption of the car. So that's what I do. Like the normal consumption on a Tesla is 160 kilowatt. What is it? 160
watts per kilometer or something?
Watts per mile or something.
Yeah.
So I tend to turn it up to 230, 240, which is a lot higher than normal.
Just to be safe.
Yeah, just to be safe. And if you do that, you can't get to every location, but, most of them you can.
Most of them you can. If anything, where we live, it's maybe trickier with a non-Tesla because Tesla is more out there than the non-Tesla charges right now.
Yeah.
Especially if you're going north of where we live. Yeah, you can do that. You can tweak it and you can say, okay, well, I don't want to stop for an hour and a half for my trip. I'd rather stop for 2 20-minute things and a 10-minute thing, and that would suit me. So I'm going to buy a car, this version of the Tesla or whatever. You can decide yourself. But I always encourage people to get a bigger battery than they think they need because, the batteries degrade 1% a year. So you end up 5 years from now having a little bit less range than you would have. And cold weather and wind, and makes that's so efficient, it makes a problem with that. Hey, I got a haircut. I actually went out and got a haircut before the Omicron gets here.
Wow. I mean, I'm looking at you right now, and
Yeah, it's all
I
gone.
honestly can't tell.
Really? It's all gone. They literally brought in people to sweep up my hair, my COVID hair, because it was a nasty bit of pile on the floor. And I mention that because my hairstylist is spraying foam insulation on some days a week because things aren't going well. He said people aren't coming back after the pandemic because he doesn't know if they're scared or if it's because they're just getting used. I think they've found a better hairstylist because he's but
or they've gotten used to cutting their own hair.
Or maybe some people I'm sure have. I let my daughter cut my hair a couple times just to get me through it. I had to tip him for the first time quite a bit just to make up for that.
Yeah, no, I just went back for my first professional haircut in a year and a half, and I left a big tip. But so if I need spray foam insulation, I can talk to your hairdresser.
Yes,
right?
you can.
Because I might need that. And I'm still trying to find an electrician. I've called 3 now, and none of them have called me back. So I'm still working on that. Hopefully have an update next week.
I should have asked him because hairdressers know everybody. Especially him.
Yeah.
I can ask him any question, and he'll know something about it.
Wow.
I fill him in on a lot of things, but,
You're one of his sources.
And here's another thing, Brian, that I thought was interesting. He told me that what's it called? There's an automotive place, Green Line Automotive, right? That's selling used EVs. Well, they have a Regina office where we live too,
Yes.
and one in Saskatoon. And apparently, because everybody's always worried about their batteries and their EVs. What happens if I have to replace it? Because this is something we talked about a few weeks ago now. They will actually. They're certified to actually repair EVs because,
nice.
with my Nissan Leaf, I would have to ship it to the closest Nissan dealer that's certified to do EVs. And that's a long ways away. It's 4 hours away and it will cost me some money. But these guys actually fix EVs and are trained to do it. And they said if you got a bad EV battery for, I don't know, it was $1,200 or something, they would repair the bad cells in it, the bad modules. Or, replace them with salvaged modules that they've bought. And
Nice.
That's a pretty good price to bring your battery back up to life if it's an old battery, because mine's going to be long in a tooth pretty soon. It's 9 years old. So that's it's a lot better than, say, $5,000 or $6,000 to buy a new battery or even a salvaged battery and have it replaced, because nobody can really do that. So that's a very cool option. And those people are on the ground floor. Here's another funny thing that happened. A guy came up to me at the end and said, "I listened to your podcast."
Nice.
And I said, "Oh, great." And he said, I wanted to ask him a question. He said, "I'm sorry, I can't tell you anything about me. I work for the government." So he was on the down low, but he wanted to ask me some questions and about sort of the way things are going and what trends he should be interested in. So I guess we bashed the government a lot here on the show, and he didn't want to.
We made him literally scared to talk to us.
Didn't want to tarnish himself. So. All right, Brian, I was kind of discouraged that some of the podcasts I was listening to, like the Daily from the New York Times in November, was this podcast is brought to you by Exxon Mobil. I don't know if you heard that on some popular podcasts. Apparently, because the climate summit was going on, they sponsored a whole bunch of podcasts. And the Guardian just did a piece on it, and they said, if you're a regular listener to the New York Times podcast, The Daily, you would have heard an ad for ExxonMobil's carbon capture investments more than once in November. And yes, that's true, I did. Similar ads have run on NPR podcasts, including Invisibilia and Up First. I tried to find it, but they have sort of live, they insert the ads live, so as you download it. And Yeah, they don't have those ads anymore, unfortunately. I couldn't find a sample of it, but I do have the text of it. They said that their sudden interest in podcasts coincides with recent embrace of social media and newsletter advertising. So if we had a newsletter, they might want to advertise in it, and may well be driven in part by the key difference in the regulation of these newer media, regulated by the Federal Trade Commission, versus legacy print, TV, radio, media, etc., which are regulated by the Federal Communications Commission. So, two different things, and you can lie on one and not the other. So guess what they did, Brian? They lied. Because they're the worst of the worst. Exxon, as you know, is probably the most evil of the evil. So, yeah. I'm going to read, I want you to read it. Would you mind reading what the Exxon ad said on the Daily, and then I'll read something that contradicts it?
Okay, in my best radio voice. A number of climate experts agree that carbon capture and storage is crucial to reducing emissions to combat climate change. That's why ExxonMobil is working to deploy this technology at scale for the highest emitting sectors. It can remove more than 90% of CO2 emissions from carbon-intensive industries, which can help lower the carbon footprint of many everyday things, like the roads we drive on and devices we all rely on. Learn more about how ExxonMobil is advancing climate solutions, like carbon capture and storage, at exxonmobil.com/solutions.
Brian, that was too good. I think they might use that. You might hear yourself in a commercial now. I didn't want you to do it that good. Okay.
Wait a minute. We just, it's like they sponsored our podcast, but they didn't pay us any money.
Exactly. Well, all that was bullshit. There's many misleading aspects to this ad, said Ben Franta, who studies the history of climate disinformation at Stanford University, because of its vague language and presentation of microfacts without context. He said, you read it and it gives you the impression that carbon capture is new and effective and we're going to scale it up, when in reality, none of this is true. For Exxon's ad in the Daily to be accurate, Heated World says it would go something like this. A number of climate experts agree that carbon capture and storage, CCS, is crucial to reducing emissions to combat climate change, but it's a small number. And it's always only when paired with significant fossil fuel reductions, which Exxon is actively fighting against. That's why ExxonMobil is working to deploy this technology at scale for the highest emitting sectors, but it's at a pace too slow to make any sort of difference. Exxon is currently capturing less than 1% of its annual emissions, and most of that carbon is being used to produce more oil. Exxon is working much harder to keep emitting, and it can remove more than 90% of CO2 emissions from carbon-intensive industries, and my body can technically perform a backflip, but it's never actually done one before. That's true. Mm-hmm. Technically, I could perform a backflip. You know, your back's out.
No, not me.
Technology that could do this at a significant level does not yet exist. And there is one estimate that says a single CCS plant could theoretically reduce 90% of one single industrial plant's emissions, but it's also never happened, and it's highly debatable. And no one thinks CCS should ever capture 90% of all industrial emissions, or could. This cleverly worded sentence falsely implies it can help lower the footprint of many everyday things like roads we drive on. Well, no, it can't. It can't be used in cars, although I made a joke about that in my article on CBC. It's quite absurd. Learn more about how ExxonMobil is advancing climate solutions like carbon capture and storage. We provide no information about how we're advancing climate destruction on this website, though. And it's all rosy stuff. ExxonMobil not sponsoring the Clean Energy Show this week.
This is the Clean Energy Show.
Okay, so moving on to China, there was a story on Electrek this week. And as we've reported many times in the past, there's a real dichotomy going on in China. They're the world's biggest polluter, but they're also the world's leader in the growth of clean energy. So there was a report recently, their installed capacity for offshore wind, which you've talked about on the show quite a bit, is now 302 gigawatts. And they're expecting to get that total up to 1,200 gigawatts, which I think would be 1.2 terawatts of total wind and solar capacity by 2026. And this is moving up that date from 2030. They had originally said they were going to reach this number in 2030. Now it's 2026, 1.2 terawatts of total wind and solar. So China keeps moving forward in a big way.
You know, I get the sense that they don't care what people think, but they're also giving numbers and dates where they think that they know that they can meet. But I think those dates will continue to be moved up. I mean, that's not solving everything that's wrong with China's pollution problem, but I think it's positive too. So, yeah, 2026 is 4 years. And like I've been saying on the show, it's been clear from COP26 that, you know, we have to do a lot this decade. Otherwise, everything sort of adds up. And this is going to be the hardest decade. I think prices will take care of everything quite easily in the following decades. But this decade, we have to do the work to make sure that happens. So it's good to see that they are moving that up. And now it's time for What Do You Think?
What do you think?
Brian, this is where we ask you, what do you think about things that I'm not sure about? So, you know, bear with me. How's your back doing?
I had to adjust my position here, but
sorry,
hopefully,
it's not a good sign when you adjust your position.
We'll keep going.
We were talking earlier that it would be a good thing to have muscle relaxants without the Tylenol. If anybody knows if those exist, send some to Brian right now.
If you've got a dealer, hook me up.
Tesla is integrating car sharing in its app, hinting at a Tesla network. Why is that happening now?
Well, there's all kinds of software improvements going on at Tesla, and this is one I'm quite interested in because I was surprised when we bought our car. We bought it in my partner's name, and so the whole initial account attached to the car is her login and password. But when I loaded the app onto my phone, I had to use her login and password, which I thought was weird. I thought we'd be able to use my own login and password and just connect the two. So it looks like this update fixes that problem. So you'll be more easily able to share your car. So I should theoretically be able to now log in with my own Tesla login, and we can share the same car. And then if somebody wants to borrow our car or take it for a test drive, we should be able to give them authority to do that. So yeah, this is laying the foundation for what will eventually be hopefully a Tesla network, or when you go rent a Tesla at Hertz, you'll be able to just go in with your own phone. They can authorize you to use the car. The car will remember all of your settings. So your Tesla settings should be transferable to any Tesla.
What's that car share network that anybody can rent out their car? Do you remember the name of that? It's popular in the States.
No, I don't recall. But yeah, there's different kinds of that kind of car sharing. Yeah.
There's people who have bought Teslas and are renting them out on that network. Almost more, they barely use the car themselves, so they're making good money off of it. It depends where you are and what the demand is, but...
No, well, I know a guy who's put down a reservation for, something like 50 or 100 Tesla Cybertrucks because he thinks that he'll be able to do that, just rent them out.
Well, that's fascinating, Brian, because you see, I have a deposit on a Cybertruck, and one of their relatively early ones.
As do I.
Maybe we should have Cybertruck races for the Clean Energy Show.
Yes, and there was an update recently. So the first model that's going to come out is going to be a 4-motor model, a motor on each wheel. That's new information. So they've tweaked the lineup of cars a little bit. They've eliminated the kind of single motor one. So if you have a reservation for a single motor one, it sounds like you're going to have to upgrade to the dual motor one. But that was other Tesla news this week.
Well, I foolishly bought, reserved the most expensive one, which is the least likely one that I can buy. It's also the most likely one that I could resell if I was going to. Because you were saying last week that, you could sell your Tesla at market value, even though it's more than a couple of years old.
Yeah, I might even be able to sell it at a profit. There's such a waiting list for them right now.
And the people who have new ones can sell them at a profit for sure. So maybe I could do that with Cybertruck. Maybe I want to.
No, and people have been flipping the Cybertruck whistle on eBay. I don't know if you saw that, but they released a Tesla whistle shaped like a Cybertruck.
And of course they sold out.
They sold out $50 each. By the time I heard about it, like 2 hours later, they were already sold out. I might have actually bought one.
Why?
They're going, for $400 on eBay now.
Anything Tesla, whether it's a whiskey bottle or whatever the heck it is, buy it because somebody wants it.
You'll be able to. Yeah.
We're lucky enough to be there at the right time. So Toyota is partnering with BYD, the Chinese electric vehicle company that dates back to the mid-aughts that Warren Buffett invested in. They make a lot of buses in China and a lot of cars. And Toyota's partnered with them to build an affordable $30,000 U.S. electric car. However, it's unclear if those will ever go outside of China. And some other people are saying, well, it's just basically a BYD car with a Toyota nameplate on it. But I don't know. What do you think? I
think that's basically true. I think they're doing it because they have to. There's rules in China about electric vehicles, and they have to. And pretty soon they're going to have to do this in other places too. So I don't know why they aren't just going ahead and doing it. So
Tesla's having issues getting hands on solar panels and delaying some. How could that possibly be? They have their own solar company.
Yeah. Well, it's like batteries, right? There just isn't enough capacity. There's more demand than there is capacity at manufacturing plants. So, I think we're going to see shortages for the next decade.
Okay. So Inside EV says Honda has already given up. What's the story? I didn't see that.
Okay. So, there was a story on Inside EVs, and there was an interview with Honda's new CEO. And I believe the interview was in Japanese, so I believe we're looking at a English translation here. So that might explain, I don't know, some of the weirdness going on here. But there's a very weird quote here from the new Honda CEO, and here's what he says. "We feel there's a rush to electrification, particularly after Mr. Biden took office. But it's still going to take some time, so we don't want to focus too much effort onto it right now and wear ourselves out."
Okay.
Basically they've already given up, basically. It's crazy. And then in the next paragraph, "At this point, I don't think we should be doing it alone. We should team with partners like General Motors and then build to a certain volume to ensure business feasibility." So much like Toyota with BYD, Honda's talking about partnering with GM. They think that other people can solve their problem for them, that they don't want to do it themselves. So it's like, oh, okay, well, we'll get BYD to make our cars. We'll get GM to make our cars. But, that's no guarantee of anything. It's, I don't know. This is going to lead to big problems for them in the future.
Brian, I don't think that Honda and Toyota, both Japanese companies, have any idea. I mean, how bloody stupid can they be? Let me ask you a question.
No, they think...
An important question. Is Tesla in Japan?
Yes. Apparently they are selling cars in Japan. I don't think it's huge there, but yes, they are.
Because, that's kind of like the first thing we need to happen in a country like that. They need to see that what's happening. Did they not pick up a newspaper and see that Tesla is like the biggest car company in the world? I mean...
Yeah, kind of odd, isn't it?
Are you daft? Is there a way to short these companies? Because, and by the way, and I know I keep mentioning this, but I keep getting astounded by driving by my Toyota dealership. There was 2 cars on it, Brian. And It's got a used dealership right beside it that they own, 0 cars. Yeah. They literally have no cars.
Yes. Now, I remember a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Tesla tweaked their standard range Model 3. And so the 0 to 60 time is not quite as good. I think we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. They've had to adjust. Instead of 5.5 seconds, it's now 6.1 or something. And so the speculation was, they've shifted to the iron batteries. They're a little heavier. So sure, that takes a bit of a hit. Well, it turns out there's another report that they had to change components in the electric motors because of the supply chain issues. So they had to change components in the electric motors, and they weren't able to get quite as much power out of them. But that's just an example of what Tesla's doing to get around the supply chain issues, whereas other car companies like Toyota, they're just shutting down their factories and they're just not making any.
This is a weird time we're in, isn't it? It's getting weirder.
Strange.
Okay, well, let's move on to another story. A Velocopter is to create the first public eVTOL system. That's a system. This is basically a giant drone that you can fly around in as a person. These have been around for a while. Uber was even into it for a while. And yeah, well, I think they're actually setting dates now where, in Saudi Arabia, this is one of those weird Saudi Arabian stories, and there are many. There are this futuristic region of Neom. Have you heard of that? I bet you have. No, you haven't.
Well, I don't know. There was the Fully Charged YouTube channel had a story about Saudi Arabia, so perhaps it's that same area.
It's a region in northwest Saudi Arabia on the Red Sea being built from the ground up as a living laboratory, a place where entrepreneurship will chart the course for this new future, a hub for innovation, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, they're going to put Velocopters in there. And as part of, partnership with that development, they're going to design, implement, and operate the world's first public eVTOL systems, mobility systems. So, 15 aircraft will be initial operation in 2 years, perhaps 3 years. We'll see. So they feel like the technology is ready. These are electric, of course, but noisy, not as noisy as a helicopter, but they're noisy. And they look like planes. They look like, a drone that you would have yourself, except bigger, and then you put a person in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the flying car that we were all promised from the 1950s. And, there's range issues as well. They can't go that far, but the technology totally works. Somebody's just got to scale it up. And
you don't want to run out in one of those. Fall to the ground. Yeah, this is a $500 billion development, this place is Neom. And it's going to have wind and solar and, because that's the future. Okay, Saudi gets that. I wonder if women can drive and have human rights and stuff like that, because that'd be very futuristic of them if they did that. This includes researching the possibility of this stuff in the U.S. as well in Los Angeles. And test flights are coming to Japan in 2023. And they're also working to operate air taxis in Paris during the 2024 Olympics. But then, Toyota was going to be operating, driverless vehicles at their Olympics. Never worked out. Kind of a bummer.
And we know from our download stats that we actually do have some listeners in Saudi Arabia. So if anybody's listening, please give us a shout.
Maybe they got the idea from our show, because we've talked about them before. Whenever something happens in Saudi Arabia, know that it happened here first on the Clean Energy Show. And we like to hear from you guys. cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And we're on Twitter and TikTok, Clean Energy Pod. Check out our YouTube channel for special features. And speakpipe.com/Clean Energy Show is our voicemail. Coming up on the show, the lightning round. That's where we skim through the rest of the week's headlines very quickly. And Brian, in the feedback area this week, I wanted to finally, because I've been promising this for a long time, talk about the people who have gone and rated and reviewed us on iTunes. Because we keep asking people to do that. It's just one of those things podcasters need to do. So Tyler writes, great podcast, well informed about the clean energy, that cheap clean energy that could abundantly be available to the world. Glad to have stumbled upon this fun, entertaining, informative, and educational podcast. Keep up the great work, guys. Thank you for that. Maid Marian Fan Club writes, I've learned a ton about clean energy. Thanks, guys. And Curious 456 says, I just discovered this podcast and love it. I listen to many climate change related podcasts, and this joins the list at the top of my favorites. Super varied, informative, and entertaining. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Brian, be more entertaining. Take that back medication.
Next time I will be fully loaded.
Sure. I think we should do a New Year's Eve podcast where we get drunk.
Okay.
It's live.
Yeah.
And every time Exxon does something, we have to take another drink. Anyway, if you are on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, give us a rating and a review, and we'd be happy for you to do that for us. We'd be very thankful for it. And eventually we'll get around to reading them on the air, I promise. So, Brian, I have some lists of Tesla news that you've created this week. Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, let's go through this quickly. The first one is they've updated the pricing for one of the options that I could buy for my car. So I've got the standard range Model 3, and it comes with the hardware for heated rear seats, but it's not turned on. So this used to cost $400. They've dropped,
just to turn it on.
Just to turn it on. They've dropped the price now. It was $400. It's now $270 Canadian. Should I do this?
And it's just the rear seat. It's not. Is it the heated steering wheel too?
No, I don't have the hardware for that. So I already have heated front seats, but if I pay $270, I can turn on the heated rear seats. I'm
on the fence. I have heated rear seats in the Leaf. The Nissan Leaf, and it's standard thing, which is it's one of the ways that they addressed cold weather, is to just say everybody gets a heated steering wheel, everybody gets front and rear heated seats, and then you won't have to worry about using so much consumption. Anyway, my daughter likes it, but I don't know that makes a huge difference when people are back there. And it's really your car, Brian. Who cares what your passengers do?
Well, exactly. I never sit in the back seat, so
and I don't know how much of a fan I am of heated seats. When it's minus 40 and you're getting into the car, you're wearing a long parka anyway over your buttock, and it doesn't make much of a difference. It's kind of neat, but I also feel weird when I start frying the ham back there, because then you start feeling cold in other places if your ham is sizzling.
I used it a bit more on my last trip to Saskatchewan because I thought, well, this would be a bit more efficient. So I had the seats cranked up a little more and the cabin temperature turned down a little bit. And I felt like it did work. Of course, you can't turn the cabin down too much.
Yeah.
Because then you just get cold.
Yeah.
But I think it is a more efficient way.
When the car preheats by computer on a timer, it will turn on the heat seaters and the steering wheel. And also, I haven't mentioned this in a long time, but the heated steering wheel in the Leaf, in the first generation Leaf that I have, is notorious for getting really hot. Like, a steering wheel is really cold at minus 40 or 30 or even 20, but it's also like too hot to touch. I need gloves just to touch it. You can hear the smell the leather getting cooked up there. And after the car sort of moderates, because the temperature sensor is lower in the car, it still thinks it's quite cold in there, but it's actually warm up where your face and steering wheel is anyway. What else do you have?
Canada's Exxon Technologies has announced that they're making molds for Tesla's Gigapresses. So this is just new information, and just because we're in Canada, I'm very interested in this. It's an Ontario company, and of course, Tesla has these giant Gigapresses from Idra Group in Italy, and they're going to use these to make giant cast parts for the car, but they need a mold, basically, to put in the Gigapress, and these are apparently being made by Exxon, this company in Canada. So these are, essentially molds that, that's what goes into the Gigapress.
Yeah, and there's a lot of auto parts suppliers that are based in Canada that supply a lot of the parts for the U.S. vehicles. So that's interesting. So there's a recall in China.
Yeah, 21,599 Teslas recalled for steering knuckle issues. Doesn't sound like it's too serious, but, we report a lot of good news about Tesla, so I like to balance that out with the bad news from Tesla.
That's us. Fair and balanced.
Not a big deal, I don't think, but 21,000 cars, that's definitely not nothing, and they don't all have the problem, but that's how many are being asked to come in and check it out, and perhaps they will need a part replaced. Electrify America, this is the charging network in the U.S. that was started by Volkswagen because of their diesel scandal. They're using Tesla power packs. They're going to have 140 of these at different Electrify America charging stations. So I just thought this was interesting because even though this is a third-party non-Tesla network, that they're still getting a piece of this business because, energy is really a huge part of Tesla's business. So these power packs are basically batteries, and Electrify America has done the math and has figured out, well, if we put 140 of these at our charging locations, they can use them to basically balance the load from the grid and to use power from off-peak times to charge those batteries. So, they'll save money.
Okay. And what's this? Tesla's ordered to pay money to some Model S owners?
Yeah, more bad news. Tesla was ordered to pay $14,000 per car to some Model S owners in Norway over range loss. So a year or two ago, there was a software update that caused the battery capacity in quite a few Teslas to drop quite a bit. So Tesla was kind of tweaking the formula for kind of managing the health of the batteries. But for some owners, it ended up being quite a large drop. And so they had to basically settle a kind of a class action lawsuit. So yes, a judge in Norway has ordered them to pay $14,000 per owner per car. But Tesla's going to appeal that and, maybe they can bring that down a bit.
All right, Brian, we're running long, and this is a terrible week to run long because of your back, but Clean Technica says that the Volkswagen ID Buzz, that is the van, the cool bringing back of the Volkswagen van, is actually going to be available for pre-order now in Norway and Sweden, with production scheduled to begin in March, and the first deliveries arriving the end of June. That's so cool. Customers in those two countries do not need to put a deposit down even to reserve a vehicle. They'll either be configured as a passenger model with seating for 6 or as a cargo van, and hopefully one day as a camping van too. So, yeah, that's...
No, this is a very cool vehicle, and hopefully it gets out there, and hopefully it isn't too crazy expensive.
Yeah, that's maybe part of the problem, but it'll come down in a few years if it is anyway. So we're always talking about Norway's crazy numbers. Well, they're even crazier now, so we have to mention them for November. They were 94.9% plug-in vehicles sold, other vehicles. Now, when I did my presentation at the library, some of my slides I had to go through that were this is another amazing thing of it. They were so out of date, so you could see all the things that have happened. 3 years ago, we were saying, holy crap, it's 50% in Norway. Can you believe that? Will that ever sustain itself? And now it's 95%. 95%. This has got to be more than the disincentives for gas vehicles. This has got to be total acceptance that is the way to go there. Don't you think?
No, and you're never going to go back. Like, it's not going to suddenly drop and, 2 years from now, it's going to be back down to 50%. This is a very clear trend that it's going very quickly to 100%. And some of those are plug-in hybrids, which do burn some gas, but it's something like 73% of those are full EVs. So, this is amazing.
Plug-in hybrids are fine because they're taking, most of the trips are be in electric mode, hopefully. Maybe not where we live, but yeah. Anyway, it's time for the lightning round. Let's very quickly clean up the headlines, Brian, before your back sort of welds itself into a position you don't want to be in and you're stuck in the recording studio for the rest of your living days. Tesla updates the Cybertruck with 4 motors, as you've said, but 4-wheel steering and crab mode is something we didn't mention. So that's in competition with some of the other vehicles like the Hummer EV.
Yeah, so all 4 wheels can turn in the same direction and the car goes, kind of sideways. That's cool.
Ford developing all new EV on a new full-size pickup platform. I find this interesting because there's this big push for Ford pickup trucks, right? Well, now they're saying they're going to scrap that after they build a few of them for a couple of years and start over again. Because they had no idea the demand would be what it is.
Yeah.
They've doubled demand and they need to triple it, and they can't. They admitted they can't. They admitted that with the pre-orders of the F-150, they need to triple production, and they can't because they are not ready. the battery plants are not in place, and there's going to be a shortage of batteries for a few years, my friend. Banned for decades, releasing oil sands tailing water is now on the horizon, according to CBC News. This is controversial because, they tried to mine coal in the south of Alberta, where the oil sands are created, and people rose up against it. Brian, I also, this is an interjection here, but we were talking about Alberta a lot, and I heard this podcast with Peter Mangeris and some other people say that, the premier there, Jason Kenney, he's not from Alberta. He's never really lived there, and he's just decided he'd go be premier there, one of Canada's, most oil-rich and business-rich provinces. He actually was worked in Saskatchewan politics for a while, and he went to San Francisco and studied philosophy at the University of San Francisco, and then quit. Does not seem like you're oil conservative, but I don't know what's going on there. It's also interesting that, he has never publicly talked about his spouse, or if he has one. It's actually a mystery. What politician can do that? How does he get away with that? I'm not saying we should, but everyone else does.
We're a bit more respectful in Canada, where apparently if the politician doesn't mention it, the reporters don't ask about it, and don't ask, don't tell.
But here's the interesting thing: there was a survey out that said that Albertans were very environmental compared to what people expected them to be.
Yeah, I believe that's true.
And the theory is, and this is because they were against the coal, and the theory is that mountain people are always environmental because they love their mountains. It's not mountainous everywhere, but it's close access to the populations to get to the mountains, and it's the most some of the most beautiful mountains in the world are right there, and they have a close affinity to them. The theory is that because Jason Kenney, premier of Alberta, is not actually an Albertan, he just assumed the stereotype that they were didn't care about the environment, and he went in there not caring about the environment, and that's why his numbers partially are tanking. That's an interesting theory. I thought I'd bring it up.
Yeah, that's great.
Write us if you have a theory on that. So Tesla superchargers will be open for other EVs in Norway in 2022. And along that front, the first Shell recharge station in Canada is opening. Shell gas stations are getting it, and it's actually in Edmonton, where you're going, and I was just in, interestingly. And they're going to open up 36 of these in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. However, it's only 50 kilowatt. It's almost like the oil company is trying to make charging difficult for us.
Interesting. Yeah, well, I've had my electric car, my Tesla, for almost 2 years now. And one of the reasons I went Tesla was the charging network, which is the biggest and the best so far. And almost 2 years later, and there's no other electric charger in Davidson, Saskatchewan, which is the one place you need it here in our province because it's halfway between our two major cities. So 2 years later, nobody else has bothered to put another Tesla or put an electric car charger there, and so Tesla continues to own the market.
And they've been lobbied to do so, and they haven't. It's like they don't care. It's just like,
and there's money available. There's subsidies available to do it.
Lots of it.
And they are going in some places, but not in the right places.
The U.S. government is handing $25 billion over to airports over the next 5 years, but that is not something that is good for the environment. The U.S. aviation, it emits more than the whole Bangladesh economy, just aviation in the United States. And airports are advised by the regulator to expand when they reach 60% of capacity. So they're encouraged to expand, which is not the most environmental thing.
No.
So Toyota, speak of the devil, has zero emission sales in Europe by 2035. Why? I think you know the answer. It's because they have to. They're not committing to anything.
Yes.
Europe is saying that it has to do that. And Toyota says, darn these people. They don't understand. Electric vehicles aren't going to take off.
We'll just get BYD to make them for us.
Come on, people. Come on. When will these guys wake up, Brian? Do you have any predictions on that? Do you have a year when they're going to finally get it?
No, but if I was a smarter stock market investor, I would try and figure out a way to short them, but that seems too complicated for me.
So, despite Biden's push, EVs will make up only 4% of American auto sales in 2021. That compares with 9% in China and 14% in Europe. And expect China to quickly catch up to Europe, I think, in the next 2 years.
Well, that just shows how far behind the U.S. is. That's too bad.
It is, and Canada, to our surprise, is ahead of the U.S., which is weird. But and we have less incentives here, actually. So lithium prices continue to nudge up on the latest benchmark assessment. So just one lithium component, lithium carbonate, is up 317% in 12 months. Lithium hydroxide is up 193% in the last 12 months. So there's a big squeeze yet to come. And finally this week, you're back and go back to bed. UK, it is determined there that used electric cars now sell faster than gas cars, according to Auto Trader. So the used market is still tight here. I imagine it'll be for 2, 3, 4 years, but everyone's decided. I think it's tipping. I think we're going over the cliff here, buddy. I think EVs are coming fast. Anyway, that's our time for this week. Thanks for listening. We always appreciate you listening to us. Let us know what you think and consider rating and reviewing us wherever you get your podcast, whether it's on iTunes or not. And we look forward to talking to you next week.
See you next week.